We are going to be running the Maven commands one at a time. So let me open the official Maven documentation for us to see the various Maven commands which we are going to be running. So if you come to the Maven official documentation, introduction to the build lifecycle, you can see the build lifecycle. There are three built-in build lifecycles: the default, the clean, and the site. The default lifecycle handles your project deployment, which is of course what they're going to focus on. This is what handles our project deployment. And then we have the clean lifecycle, handles project cleaning, and the site builds or handles the creation of your project's website. Now, we are going to focus first on running these individual commands. The first command is the validate project, and the validate the project and the validate command validates the project is correct and all necessary information is available. Now, as far as Maven is concerned, what are the necessary information that we saw? If you go to your Java code, which is the main project website, or if you go to the main project directory, you'll be able to see, you'll see the SRC, which is the project source code. And in the SRC, there are two main directories which you'll see. You'll see the main directory, which contains the Java application, which contains the Java application code, and then you will see the test, which contains the unit test cases, Now, equally in this file, you will see a pom.xml file. This is another very important file which you'll see in this directory, the pom.xml file. So when you're running the Maven validate command, validate will first check if all these files are found in your project source code repository. You will check if you have the SRC containing a main which has your application, the Java application code, and then you also check the unit test cases, and you check the pom.xml file. Remember, we mentioned in our pom.xml file, you can have the dependencies stored in this file. You can have plugins stored in this file. So all the necessary plugins and dependencies that will be installed, Maven validate will check if all of these are valid or are found in such configuration file. So we are going to run the command mvn validate. So let's go ahead and go to our EC2 instance to run the mvn validate. Now, if you do an ls here in this directory, we have the src folder. You can see do tree to see the folder detailing. Once we do tree, we have our main, we have our test, and our main contains the demo application.java, and our test contains the demo application test.java. Let's go ahead to run mvn validate. So we run mvn validate. Once you run mvn validate, it tells you info scanning for projects. It's basically scanning, and then downloading from Central is downloading Apache Maven Spring Framework, boot, Spring Boot. Remember, we mentioned this in our pom.xml file. If you come back here to our pom.xml file, this is our Java application code, our pom.xml file. If you come to our pom.xml file, you will see that dependencies which you mentioned was Spring Boot starter, and then Spring Framework. We equally have other dependencies and plugins. We equally have the JUnit dependencies and so on. So once you run Maven validate basically does scanning of your projects to check all the various plugins and dependencies, and then runs them through to ensure that everything you have in your pom.xml file is valid. So validate building Java web app 1.0 snapshot, and then build success. You have finished total time 3.51 seconds, the date in which the validate was done, and the final memory 15 of 36 megabits. So if you are sure that you have executed the command properly, then you have a build success. So just to summarize, you can see the Spring Boot plugin, which was mentioned under our plugins. If you can search this file, you see other plugins that have been installed in this project based on the details which we had in our pom.xml file. Keep referencing our pom.xml file for all the necessary details with respect to your given application code or respect to your given project. The very first command which you've executed is the Maven validate command. While we are still in the project directory, we are going to be running our second Maven command. If you come again to the official Maven documentation, we are going to run the Maven compile command. Maven compile helps us to compile the source code of the project. When we say compile, what does that mean? Compile basically means we are going to convert this code. If you do, let me do tree. If you do tree, you see that the code is found if you see that our project code, which is found in the main demo src, this code is written in a language which humans understand. So let me cd into src so I can cut the file. I'll cd into src, and then now let's cut the file, the java com example demo, and then demo java app. This is the actual application code. So if you cut this file, if you cut this demo java application file, what you will see is a code that is written by humans, which is what humans understand. This is written in the Java programming language. Now, the Maven compile command will take this code from this human readable language to a code which the compiler understands. So once you run the Maven compile command, is basically going to create a .class file, or it's going to create a whole directory of that .class files, which are files which are files understood by the compiler. So remember, we installed the Java compiler when we were setting up our EC2 instance. So the files which this Java compiler understands, they are all created after you run the Maven compile command. So that's the main thing with the Maven compile command. It helps us to create from, let me put it in a way, let me see, human readable code to a .class file which is understood by our Java compiler. So this is basically what the Maven compile command does. So let's go on to run the Maven compile command in our project code base. I'll cd back. Let me cd back to the initial start of our directory. Let me cd back. Let me clear. If you do pwd, you see we are in the practice Maven Java code. Now let me do tree. So you see we have, when you do tree, you have just main and we have test. But now take note, I'll be running the Maven compile command. So Maven compile is scanning the project. You see it's building the snapshot, building Java web app snapshot. And then if you scroll down, by the way, when you run Maven command, like I explained in an introductory video, when you run Maven command, it still reruns all the commands. We ran the first command was the Maven validate command. So it will first validate the project. For every time you run a new command, you run all the commands previous to the current command which you're executing. So in our case, it will run the Maven validate command first before running the Maven compile command. Now, if you see, once you finish running the Maven compile command, it has done the compilation. You see, changes detected, recompiling the module. So compiling one source file to this. This is a file that has been compiled, home ec2 java.code. It has created now a class file, which is the class file that will be used to subsequently create packages, which you'll see in our next module. So let me clear. If you do an ls, take note, we now have a directory called target that was created. If you go back to our previous or when we did the ls previously, there was no target directory created, but the Maven compile command creates a target directory, and this target directory contains all the unit test case files which the compiler understands. So let me do a tree for us to see the content of the target directory. So if you do a tree now, before we had just the src containing our main and our test, but if you do tree, we now see we have a target, and this target contains the classes. A new file type called, a new directory called classes has been created with the demo application.class. All of this is understood by the compiler, and it is created immediately after you run the Maven compile command. So that's a basic responsibility, or that's a basic thing which the Maven compile command does. And if you even look, it has created many more files in our directory. Previously we had over 14 files or 14 directories, but a lot more directories have been created because new directories with files understood by the compiler have been created. Let's go on to our next module to run the next set of Maven commands. Now we are going to run the next Maven command. Let's come to the Maven documentation. Now the next command which we are going to be running is the Maven test command. Test command helps us to test the compiled source code using a suitable unit testing framework. these tests should not require the code be packaged or deployed. Now, these test cases are created by the developers. Remember, I explained earlier that when a developer writes a code, like I explained when we started running the Maven validate command, when a developer creates the code, they give the main application code in the main directory, and then they provide the unit test cases. This is the unit test cases which the DevOps engineers use to be able to provide continuous feedback on the implementation of this given command. Now, how does this help you as a DevOps engineer? Immediately, immediately you are building a CI/CD pipeline. Remember, we mentioned that we can integrate Maven with Jenkins. And what this means is you can run all these Maven commands through a Jenkins pipeline. Now, if you have set up a Jenkins pipeline so that you have your Maven as a build tool for your Java app, and then you have a Jenkins server, and maybe you have set up Slack for continuous communication. Slack, basically, developers are developer maybe A, developer B, and developer C. They are all in the same Slack channel, and of course, these same developers push code to your Maven through the GitHub, as we already saw in our directory, and then to the Maven app. Now, the moment the developers push the code to the Java web app, Jenkins automatically uses the Maven commands to build this code. And if the build result, remember when you do a build, you can either have a success or a failure. Once the build result is, once Maven runs, or once Jenkins runs the build, it's automatically going to send build results to Slack. Now, before Maven even sends, or before Jenkins even sends the results to Slack, Jenkins will run unit test cases. So we have our SRC, and then we have our main application code, and then we have our test. Jenkins will run these test cases. Based on the output of these test cases, Jenkins will send feedback to Slack, where the developers will know if the code was successfully compiled or not. So can use the Maven test to be able to do unit tests on the various code which the developers have produced. And these unit test cases are very important in the case where you are implementing or adding a technology for static code analysis. Like, let's put, for example, you want to use SonarQube for static code analysis. The moment you write your Maven command, SonarQube can run some unit test cases as well. SonarQube can run some unit test cases on the application code, and all of these unit test cases will be based on the test which you provide in your application source code. So that's basically how developers make use of the Maven test command to be able to run tests. So let's go ahead to run the test on our EC2 instance. So I'll be running Maven test. So as I run Maven test, remember I mentioned every time you run a command, it will run subsequent commands, because probably they have pushed new code into a given directory. You run the first commands to first validate. After validating, you probably compile, and then now you run the test. You would of course take a shorter time because some dependencies were already downloaded the moment you ran the first command, maybe the Maven validate or the Maven compile. So once you run your Maven test, what you will see is it performs the unit test cases on your project source code. So you see it's building the Java app, and then you scroll down, you see compiling, nothing to do because you already got all those compilation done in a previous command. And then if you scroll down, you should be able to see that it is running tests. So if you look at the test, it is running the com example demo application test, and this demo application test was provided by the developers. If you come back to our repository here and you click on the SRC and you click on test, you see it's referencing this Java test. It's referencing this test Java com example demo. It's the same thing you have here. Com example demo application test. This is the same file, demo application test. So it's using this unit test case to perform the unit testing on our application code. And then of course, after running the unit test, it now tells you, based on your test results, did the test run? It ran one test, 0 failures, 0 errors, 0 skipped. So that's basically how you can use, and of course, if your test was successful, it will give you a build success. If your test was successful, it will give you a build success. So that's basically how you can use the Maven test command to be able to do or run your unit tests in your Maven project. Now let's go to our official Maven documentation and look at the next command. So we run Maven validate, Maven compile, Maven test. Let's do Maven package. And what does Maven package do? The Maven package takes the compiled code and package it into its distributable format, such as a jar. So it takes the package code and packages it into a distributable format, such as a jar. Now, for you to run the Maven package command, this means that you've created your Java application code. Now, this Java application code might be a source code. Once you send this source code, you can compile the source code as we've seen using Maven compile, and Maven compile will create the dot classes which the compiler understands. Now, if you want to compile or put the code in a form that can be easily distributed, maybe stored in an artifact, maybe stored in an artifact, maybe shared in different projects, you can then create a package. So from your source code, you compile the code, and after compiling the code, you can then create a package of the code. And again, this package of your code can either be a jar file, which is a Java extension. It can either be a jar file or it can be a WAR file. So once you do the Maven package command, you either create a jar file in your project directory or you create a WAR file. And these jar files are what you can easily install. You can easily install this in your application, or you can store this as an artifact. You can store this as an artifact in an artifactory. If I come back to my Maven server, let me do an ls and then I'll do tree. If you run tree, you will see we have our main, our tests, our classes, and then under demo we have surefire and so on. So let's run the Maven compile. So let's run the Maven package command. So I'll do Maven package, and then Maven package again. Before the package is created, you run all the previous Maven commands: the compile, the validate, the compile, the test, and then it's going to create a package. Remember, I mentioned this package can be a WAR file or a jar file. So let's give it time to run all the various necessary steps. Let me clear. If I do ls and then I do tree, if you do the tree, now you will see two new files have been created. The Java Web App 1.0 snapshot.jar and the Java Web App 1.0 snapshot.jar original. Now these are the package version of our application code. Previously, you will not see this jar file created in a project repository or in a project directory, but the moment you run the Maven package, it automatically creates this package. And last time we had 23 directories in our project base, but now we have over 33 directories and 18 files. Remember, when you run the package command, it creates 2 new packages, which increases the total number of files that are being stored in our project repository. So that's basically how you can use the Maven package command to create a package of your application code. By the way, I mentioned this jar file is what will be sent to your application server through maybe Ansible to be deployed on an EC2 instance for your users to access the application. This jar file is what you're also going to push if you want to put this artifact for subsequent use. You can store this as an artifact using an artifactory solution like Nexus. So Nexus can help you to artifact your solution or to artifact this package of your application stored in Nexus. And for each version, you run your application code, you can store that as a package in an Artifactory tool like Nexus. So Maven helps you to create that package, which can be stored in different versions of your application. Now let's look at the next Maven command. Again, we'll come to the official Maven documentation, and we have the Maven verify. So the Maven verify runs any checks on results of integration tests to ensure quality criteria are met. Assuming that you have some Maven code and you want to ensure that it meets some certain level of security, some certain level of maybe code duplication, and some certain level of code tests and so on, you can use the Maven verify command to check on the results as far as your integration testing is concerned. It's a very pretty straightforward, one of those straightforward commands that we have as far as Maven is concerned, and it goes ahead to run some form of, like I said, it goes ahead to run some form of verification of what you have in your existing environment. So let's go back to our Maven server and run the Maven verify command. Now, once you're on your Maven server, you run the command Maven verify and you hit enter. Again, when you run the Maven command, any Maven command you run, it will automatically run the previous commands, but it will take a shorter time to run the previous, or it will take a shorter time to run this command because you already, the moment you run the previous commands, some unit test cases were already downloaded, some plugins were downloaded, some dependencies were downloaded, and all of that. So it shouldn't take you so much time again to build a given project or to run some certain tests. Now, once you run the Maven verify command, you see it took a very short time because all the other stages were already initialized. So when you do Maven verify, you see building Java web app snapshot. We already created a snapshot from the time we already created a snapshot from the time we were able to package the code. So you see it has nothing to do Maven compiler. We already did the compilation at the level of the Maven compile. And then you see all the plugins, necessary plugins are already set up. And then we run Maven tests. We already did Maven tests, so all the unit test case dependencies were already downloaded as well. And you give you the result of the test. Remember, we do not run by the Maven test command. We run by the Maven verify, but it executes all the previous commands. You see the test. We have one test run, 0 failures, 0 skipped, and so on. And then we also have now the build success. Now, all of this is ensuring that the project code base is meeting all the necessary requirements which you may have studied in your project source code file. So Maven verify command helps you to verify to ensure that your project code base is optimal and fully functional. So again, like I explained, once you run the Maven verify command, it automatically runs the Maven validates, it runs the Maven compile, it runs the Maven tests, it runs the Maven package before running the Maven verify command. So these are the set of commands that are executed the moment you run the Maven verify. The next command which we are going to be looking at as per our official documentation is the Maven install. Now, Maven install, like the documentation says, it installs the package into the local repository for use as a dependency in other projects locally. Now, when we are talking about local, what are we looking at? We have created an EC2 instance. And in this EC2 instance, we've installed Apache Maven. We've installed Java JDK compiler as main dependencies or as the main components to have Maven running on this EC2 instance. Remember, we installed Maven in this server, and then we put some form of a Java code. This Java code basically is an application. It might be an application like Zoom, or it might be an application like Instagram, or whatever the case, or Jenkins, and so on. Now, this Java application, when you create it, it has its own set of dependencies that you definitely be created with. If you require this application, for example, let me take for example Jenkins. Jenkins is a Java app. Jenkins was built with a Java programming language. Jenkins is a Java app. Assuming that you need Jenkins to have some, or you need Jenkins to work or to interface with other resources in this EC2 instance, you need to install the final version of code that was created. So what the Maven install command does is after packaging your code as a .jar file, Maven install will install this jar file in your EC2 instance. Now, if there's any application in the EC2 environment or in your AWS environment that requires these projects as its dependencies, the moment you run the Maven install will install this jar file so that other applications in your project code base can make reference to. When we talk about your local repository, we can have Maven running on an EC2 instance or an Azure virtual machine. You can have Maven running on your local computer. Now, this your computer might be based on the Windows OS. It can be Windows OS. It can be based on the Mac OS, or it can even be based on the Linux OS, but running locally. So if you want to run your project locally for dependencies to make use of this, the application that was created, maybe you have your artifact as .jar. If you want to install this, you run the Maven install command. Let's go to our EC2 instance and then run the Maven install command. So I'll clear. Let me do ls. Let me do Maven install, and I hit enter. So it's scanning the project code base, deploying from central Maven repo. It does the unit test, just like I explained before. You run all the previous commands before running now the current command, which is the Maven install command. So you see, if you come here, it will tell you that info installing this application in the home, easy to user, practice Maven learning, and so on and so on and so on. You want to take note of the Maven install command as one of the most important commands in the Maven build life cycle. Our last command, which we are going to look at in the Maven build life cycle, is the Maven deploy. Again, from the official Maven documentation, we have deploy. This deploy is done in the build environment. It copies the final package to a remote repository for sharing with other developers and other projects. So if you want to push your final package of your application code for the use or for other developers to make reference to, or for other developers to make use of, you use the Maven deploy command. So we are going to look at the Maven deploy command. Basically, what the Maven deploy command does is, once you've already created your package version of your application, it is packaged as either a .jar file or a .war file. Now, once you package these files, remember these files are created after you run the Maven package command. Once you create a package of this file, if you want this file to be stored in a remote repository, that means if you want it, we created this file in an EC2 instance, but we do not want to use it just within our EC2 instance. You might want to make use of these files across different environments, or across different environments, or across different platforms. You now will want to push this artifact out of your AWS instance, and for you to push this artifact out of your AWS instance, you run the Maven deploy command. And like the documentation says, when you run Maven deploy commands, Maven deploy is going to deploy this. Maven deploy is going to deploy this by ensuring that it moves this .jar file into an artifactory. In this case, Nexus, into an artifactory. So the artifactory there is basically to store all the different artifacts, all the different .jar files in the case where a jar is created, or the .war file, which are the different versions of your project code. So that's basically what Maven deploy does. And if you are setting up a pom.xml file where you're deploying these artifacts to Nexus, you must take note of the Nexus public IP, because that's what will be referenced each time a build or a deploy command is executed. So let's go ahead to run the Maven command to perform a deploy. So I run Maven deploy and I hit enter. So you see building Java application. That's executed all the previous commands from validate to compile, from compile to test, from test to package, from package to verify to install, and then now we are going to see it's currently trying to uh, perform a deployment. So you see Spring Boot Maven plugin 2.2.2.2 release repackage. So once you run the Maven deploy, you can see it's looking for the repository to download. We do not have this repository set up. We've not yet set up our Maven. We've not yet set up our Nexus server, so a deployment cannot be performed. But if you look here, it says Maven deploy plugin 2.8.2 deploy default, and then now downloading from Nexus deployment repo, this and so on. So it is hooked because we have not yet set up our deployment through Nexus. We are going to be doing Nexus in our next module. So without wasting so much time, let's run the last command as far as Maven build steps are concerned. I'll press Ctrl C, and then let me clear my screen. Now they say every time you run a build and you want to get rid of some unnecessary files that were created during the build, Maven says you can use the Maven clean deploy. So this one equally builds your project code base, removing some unnecessary vulnerabilities, and then now ensuring that your code meets a certain standards. And after performing a build, if there are unnecessary files, you can discard those files by using a Maven clean. If you run Maven clean, you're basically removing unnecessary application files that were created. So it takes a short time, and you see deleting dash 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 home, this target, and so on. So if you do 3, a target file is no longer there. All those unnecessary files are no longer there because you've already pushed them to an artifactory. We are assuming that you've already pushed them to an artifactory. So that Maven clean cleans all those files which you've been running, or which every time you run the command, it automatically creates those files for you.